Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Trump met with faith leaders, law enforcement officials, and small business owners during a race relations and policing event in Dallas Thursday afternoon. Absent from the conversation were Dallas's police chief, the Dallas County Sheriff, and district attorney, all of whom are African American. According to the Dallas Morning News, none of them were invited. The president's meeting comes ahead of a $10 million fundraising dinner. It marks the president's first campaign event in months after the COVID-19 outbreak and is taking place in one of the many states where polls show Mr. Trump's lead against Joe Biden slipping. Biden also held an event of his own today. While meeting with business leaders in Philadelphia, the presumptive Democratic nominee announced a plan to reopen the economy in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. The plan calls for federally funded testing for every worker called back to the job, as well as guaranteed paid sick leave for anyone impacted by COVID-19. Eugene Scott joins me now. He's a political reporter for The Washington Post. Eugene, good to see you again. Why might the White House have neglected to invite Dallas's police chief, the county sheriff, or district attorney when holding a discussion about race and policing?
Well, that would have put the president in a position to hear criticism from some within the law enforcement community who don't believe that the president has actually done anything significant to soothe the tensions that we saw these last week and a half or so between law enforcement, Black Americans, and the other Americans that support them. The president has been very much involved in putting false information out about peaceful protesters and trying to stoke some of the partisan divides that we've seen him effectively tap into throughout his time in the White House.
Well, the president and other top White House officials are also pushing back on calls to rename military bases named for Confederate leaders. Top military leaders signaled that they were open to this idea earlier in the week. So who has the final say?
Well, right now, probably or quite possibly the American public. As you know, these conversations about Confederate memorials are not new. They've been happening for some time, and there have been conversations about whether or not these statues should be removed, these buildings should be renamed, these streets and these highways. But what we have seen is that as support for these memorials continues to decrease, so does the will to allow them to stand, which is why you see so many people taking matters into their own hands. And so to think that this could be a settled issue simply because the president said so is to not really be in touch with what's happening on the ground in this country.
Well, let's talk about Attorney General William Barr. He joined President Trump today. Now, Barr contradicted his boss earlier this week when he said the president was taken to the bunker during protests outside the White House. More than 1,000 former Justice Department employees are calling on the agency's inspector general to look into Barr's involvement in responding to those protests. Is it likely that we'll see that happen?
Not likely, quite frankly. I mean, we know that Bill Barr has been very vocal in terms of keeping the message coming from the Oval Office going. This disagreement or perhaps unwillingness to press forward the narrative that comes from Trump is an outlier situation and not one that we should get used to seeing. He very much walks lock in step with the president, especially when it comes to pushing back on criticism from the media or the left about his activity.
Well, controversy about the president's photo op outside of St. John's Episcopal Church last week continues, and I want to play some of what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, said about that. Let's listen.
You may find useful, as many of you will surely go on to be flag officers. First, always maintain a keen sense of situational awareness. As senior leaders, everything you do will be closely watched, and I am not immune. As many of you saw the result of the photograph of me at Lafayette Square last week, that sparked a national debate about the role of the military in civil society. I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics. As a commissioned uniformed officer, it was a mistake that I have learned from, and I sincerely hope we all can learn from it.
So, Eugene, how significant do you think General Milley's comments are?
Quite significant. We have reporting that suggests that there was pushback towards its actions from within the military, perhaps obviously from many of the Black members of the armed services who are really deeply concerned about the issue of anti-Black racism in this country, but also from those who are increasingly concerned about police and military violence. As we know, and it's been previously reported here, peaceful protesters from America were tear gassed to make room for that photo. And tear gas is way more harmful, even deadly, than I think a lot of people realize. And for General Milley to be a part of that, he clearly is upset about that and is disappointed by his decision making and wanted to communicate to up and coming leaders that that was not the way to behave in the future.
Finally, Eugene, the president announced a return to the campaign trail, holding an event next Friday, June 19th, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Eugene, the president is facing criticism over that date, which is also known as Juneteenth, and that location. Explain why.
Juneteenth is a very significant day in American history, and in Black American history, its relationship to the end of slavery is celebrated by descendants of slaves all across America. And in Tulsa, one of the deadliest massacres happened in a very prosperous, thriving community of Black professionals when racist white people burned down these properties because the success of this community was affecting white Americans economically. And so the tone deafness of it is pretty reminiscent of how much the president has run his campaign or his administration as a whole. And it was very much something that many Black Americans and historians felt was insensitive given what's happening right now in the country conversationally about race.
And it does raise questions about who may be advising the president, who may be in his inner circle, who may or may not be aware of this history of our nation. Eugene Scott for us. Eugene, thank you very much.